Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande. My fun research project has more existential risk than I anticipated. Episode 136.
Security will store Lady Eulalia Avaricia de Torso somewhere conveniently nearby. Then, and silently and respectfully, leave the chosen a clearly marked non-urgent note over a transcript sheaf to check at her leisure.
Well, this sure is some children unproductively sniping at each other. Look, when Keltham wanted to get to know her infernal majesty, she arranged a duck pond, where she sat feeding the ducks and looking burdened by her duties, and talked to Keltham for 10 minutes, and he was very rude, and she corrected him gently and wished him good luck. Do you think you're above that?
No. No one told me to do that. Are you authorizing that deviation from alter cheliacs?
At this point, I am somewhat inclined to declare that, yeah, another weird difference between altered cheliacs and real cheliacs is that for no particular reason, you're pleasant to work with. If I declare that, what will you do?
I suppose work out with Maritzel why I call her peasant. Maybe she calls me some mildly derogatory yet light-hearted term for the altered cheliac's nobility.
Carissa finds herself tremendously tempted to declare that, yes, great, that's this situation solved and she can go back to the swords now. She has a sneaking suspicion that's not the case. Where's Asmodia gotten to?
Sitting in front of a pile of Taldorian books, one of which she's reading, with the Chelish intelligence officer assigned to Project Lawful standing nearby. There isn't time for Asmodia to have read all of the books in the has-read pile, but nobody will notice this fact. Probably Carissa Savar was just working on her glibness swords for a while.
Do you want Avaricia off the project?
I admit, saying that feels to me like failure, and I don't like failing. But I'm not able to salvage this situation on my own, and if my superiors don't have better ideas, I'm sure not stepping forth to declare I'll take responsibility for keeping her.
I can just tell her we're authorizing the lie that she's a pleasant person who doesn't behave rudely, but I wasn't sure if you had hesitated to do that because you expect it to cause problems somewhere else.
It's inconsistent with her previously shown behavior. We'd need a backstory about how and why she was trolling. I guess that's doable. It may lose us a quart or two, but so does any other recovery I can see, but we've got two problems here, fitting her into alter cheliacs and her lack of subordination. The whole thing with the nobility is too large. We don't want Keltham looking at things that are this large and confusing to him, I don't think. By the time he had answers that would satisfy his curiosity, he'd have learned far too much about Galarian and advanced the timelines toward project failure. I'm not having much luck predicting what he'd learn either. First, I asked what Keltham would deduce from the existence of Avaricia, and then I gave up on it and asked what I would deduce myself if I landed in another plane next to an Avaricia, and I'm not making much progress on that either. Besides that I clearly wouldn't be in Dathilon or Lastval. My most brilliant idea so far is to try cursing her with reduced splendor to see if she's a manageable subordinate without all that driving will and persuasiveness. I reviewed the transcript of my earlier interview with her, and you could make a case that she told me what she'd do, but she didn't spell it out, and I failed to notice how much we weren't discussing any exact details. I was distracted by her acting like a stereotype, my being certain that was a pose, and my not wanting to admit that I couldn't figure out why she was pretending. Part of me was still scared of her, and she knew that and used it, and I didn't want to admit failure about it by calling her on it. I should have told her that this was a serious occasion and to stop with the games, or gone to Malyal to admit my inability to handle her then.
Well, if we don't want Keltham looking closely at the whole concept of nobility, and I agree we probably don't, then maybe there's just no way to have nobility on the project for him to repeatedly get a close look at. Though separately, it seems good for you to get some practice at noticing when you're avoiding a problem, because it'd be embarrassing to admit you have it. My current guess is that she knows how to play many different games, but not necessarily how to stop playing games.
I don't think anyone on this project knows how to not play games at all, besides possibly Keltham, and he does that by not knowing they exist. He's probably got law for it too, sure, But right now, it's by not knowing our games exist. The frustrating thing about this is that I can see that Avaricha's deficiency is a law deficiency. Keltham could teach her to stop with the constant splendor, and then she'd be useful, if Keltham were already on our side. I could teach her to be corrigible, if I was ready to teach the next Most High, which I'm not. She's here too early. She wouldn't be as much of a shock to Keltham if she'd arrived later in our timelines when he was more knowledgeable or more corrupted. I'd maybe be able to handle her if I had more task experience. What I want to do is tell Avaricia that she's won, proved that she's superior to Asmodia and won the game, and shown that Asmodia can't possibly manage her along with the others, so now she gets to go to hell and be impressed by the competent devils there. That's not what's best for the project, probably, but I'm having some difficulty thinking past it.
Not what's best for the project because we'll make faster progress on chemistry if we have her? I'm not particularly willing to trade any chemistry progress for strain on the wall. Or not what's best for the project because weird students mysteriously quitting is definitely likelier in conspiracy?
Because it would be a weird coincidence, probability-wise, if what was the most fun to think about was also the best strategy for repairing my wall. In terms of things that are, in a way, close to reality, but also things that don't look likely in conspiracy. Suppose she keeps acting like that. She gives her theory of nobility. The rest of us are like, what the fuck are you talking about? Nobles are supposed to be moderately competent people and not such overt assholes on government projects. Even if they're assholes, we don't want to work with this person. It's obvious governance made a mistake by sending her here. Keltham doesn't hire her. None of this is anything a competent conspiracy would cleverly plan. She's created somebody who's plausibly an annoying asshole from Alter Cheliax. Maybe the least nitwit clever thing we can do is just let that play out in the obvious way where Alter Cheliax doesn't hire her.
Does she cooperate with that?
Ask security or Mayayol, not me. Impersonators and dominate person are both things, as are threats of real torture. If sending her to hell is a political problem, why not turn her into a statue for a couple of years until the project is no longer classified? I don't think Keltham would find it too surprising that her mother could arrange about paying for security around her, or unusual ways to keep secrets, to explain why she's not at the fortress and not quickly accessible.
I want to think about it, but it seems plausibly workable and only requires keeping this up for the rest of the week.
Separately, I request the ability to call in Corva Talandria on this, or other project personnel as they seem like they would have relevant knowledge on future problems. Corva seems like somebody who'd have ideas based on our interview and her thought transcripts. But commanding others' assistance at doing my job is not explicitly within the scope of my current authority. And today I've learned a valuable lesson about the importance of not surprising your superiors and getting explicit authorizations.
Sure, go ahead.
That's all I had.
Well, she'll go back to making swords, but more uneasily.
The problem with this entire plan, of course, is that it relies on a non-Dathilani being able to predict how a Dathilani reacts to anything at all.
Full timestamp day 21/17, morning.
Keltham's taking this day a bit slower. He's hopefully potentially given the new candidates anything they can do with their time, if they want to play around with known chemical reactions and try to master prestidigitation chemistry on their own, and they've got math to catch up on too. He'll spend the morning being mean to poor Yaisa.
Full timestamp day 21/17, lunch.
Have lunch brought to him privately, so he can eat quietly, and disappoint anybody anticipating or dreading a Keltham Avaricia encounter.
Timestamp day 21/17. Early afternoon.
Do all the things. Wizard practice, scroll practice, reading magical theory books. They've turned up some alchemy books for him too by now, and wow, just wow.
Day timestamp, day 21/17, late afternoon.
Keeper's only lecture to Meritzel, Pilar, and Asmodia. Small class, less to keep track of, and Keltham's brain isn't totally happy with existing a whole day at a time without giving anything visible back to his Chelish hosts. He'd feel better if he was renting an apartment module and location foundation more explicitly. Part of his brain still thinks he's a guest in somebody else's house, invited in on the expectation of interesting discussions. He'll lead with a children's fable about different ways to relate to the possibility of being wrong and finding out truths. Being able to notice and choose between the ways you'd relate to the act of realizing mind-shaking truths would probably be one of the keys to avoiding ending up as a failed keeper, or, Keltham supposes, trying to become a keeper on purpose. Here's another children's fable about a child who insists that there's an invisible, non-translating fictional creature in their closet, but always refuses to bet on any observable that, you might normally think, would tend to go along with there being an invisible creature in that closet. The point of this fable is to learn to distinguish between subjective states of really actually modeling something as true in an uncomplicated way, and unhesitatingly deriving the valid consequences of that and anticipating them to happen to you as future experiences. Eagerly betting on those if you think others don't have even more information. Thinking you ought to believe something, for reasons that include deliberative arguments for why the thing is true, while other parts of you have some wordless other model in which the thing isn't true. The corresponding observables shouldn't actually be anticipated to happen to you. Any bets like that will lose money, and any promised rewards won't really be delivered to you. This will create a kind of internal tension that shouldn't be too hard to learn to categorize over and learn perceptual reflexes about if you can spot it on a couple of previous occasions. Actually, that seems like something that should be heavily wisdom-loaded. If somebody thinks they've caught themselves doing this, or is wondering if they're doing this, they should quickly ask for an owl's wisdom so that they can see the internal feelings sharply and learn to recognize them on future occasions. Endorsing a verbal statement for social or other reasons that give you a non-accuracy maximized payoff structure for the outward verbal behavior, such as, for example, your friends saying things and you wanting to smile and agree with them. If you fail at some other mental exercises kids are taught, there'll probably be an internal pressure to believe the verbal statement. That's a very short route to smiling and agreeing. That doesn't create painful internal dilemmas about violating the rules against lying. And your brain knows that. Don't rely on being able to notice how the actual belief pressures are running into contradictory evidence or counter-arguments. You want to catch this at the introspective stage of noticing the pressure to endorse at all, and just switch off that pressure. Not believe the opposite. Reverse stupidity isn't intelligence after all, but switching off the pressure. To sum up, the idea is roughly that you want to explicitly categorize and notice the subjective difference between what you ought to believe, which is also usually the feeling of a verbal argument supporting something, what your brain is actually modeling and anticipating happening to you. What you think you'll be rewarded for believing, especially socially. You want to notice when the first two get out of alignment and start producing standard symptoms of internal disalignments along those fault lines. As for that awful third thing, of course you want to notice the feeling and destroy/switch off that pressure inside yourself, leaving only an observation about some bad incentive structure that needs to be repaired if it can be, and ignored if it can't be. This is all standard stuff for Dathilani children, and doesn't turn them into keepers. Does it sound like something that's liable to cause people to fracture in weird ways if you teach it to somebody from Galarian, and they already grew up as adults not knowing it?
Obviously, yes. But if she says that, then Keltham will ask for an example. And if she says no, then Keltham will teach this to everyone tomorrow.
I think my mother doesn't love me, says Maritzel aloud, a little wonderingly. That might... I don't actually know that that's an example, because it's not like it'd be better to figure out when you're 5.
Okay, if you figured that out in the first minutes of having this in your head, but not earlier, I can see how there might possibly be a problem. I'm also not seeing how to progress past the 9-year-old level of lawfulness without people acquiring the ability to make internal distinctions on this level either.
Do we actually have any other ideas besides just dropping it on everyone, seeing if they can handle it, and if they can't handle it, they can go to hell?
I try to teach people a bunch of other stuff first, and hope that makes it better rather than worse.
Is that how you expect it to work?
Not particularly. We could run a very small conditional prediction market about the results of the two approaches, is what my brain keeps suggesting, but I don't actually expect that to help us very much. There's just too few of us.
I'm up for being taught literally all of this stuff immediately, and seeing if that turns me into a keeper, or at least someone who can figure out exactly how dangerous it all is and how to handle this whole situation.
You're that confident it can't hurt you?
Yes, and if not, I'm confident I'll survive, and if not, I'm fine going to hell. Is there any path forwards that doesn't involve somebody taking that risk at some point? Because I'm the obvious person to do it.
I think the alternative is supposed to be taking all of the risks more slowly, so that we can take fewer of those risks at one time, and learn from experience on some of them before taking on some of the others. There's a difference between acknowledging that we have to take those risks eventually, and saying that we're certain the best path is for you to take all of them at once.
Premature caution is expensive, slow, and not fun. How about if you make a very sincere effort to break me, and we see if that does literally anything?
Pilar, are you sure this is how Alter Pilar...
He had me stabbed in the thigh yesterday, and then healed it right away and didn't do anything else, so yes!
I think I'm just going to give up on a certain internal struggle, and since your literal sanity is at stake here, double-check to make very sure that you mean the version of that where I'm telling you everything that I'm scared will break people from Golarion.
She's only even pretending to be in denial about anything, and she's still annoyed by this boy insisting on spelling everything out. There's a reason it's called subtext. Tell me everything that you're scared will break people from Golarion.
I'll consider it. Not the sort of decision I'd want to make instantly. Meritzel. I'd try saying this by message, but apparently then Asmodia just sees where the message is going anyways, and my further actions would make your answer deducible anyways. You want to continue the lesson, or go off and mull things and see what else shakes loose? Details by message, if you want those private.
I'm fine, Meritzel says curtly. Actually, I'm not fine, but I don't want to miss out on the rest of the lesson.
The alternative isn't you missing out on the lesson. It's that we break and resume another day, and you don't miss anything. You know, never mind. I shouldn't even have asked you. These things would be expected to have latent effects, not just immediate effects. And it's stupid not to give those another day to develop and observe before piling anything else on.
You're insulting Meritzel here.
Overruled. Sticking to my theme. This isn't just a challenge to your ability to learn law without getting hurt. It's an experiment where I'm figuring out how to teach law. When you're experimenting, it is sometimes considered wise to apply one experimental manipulation at a time so you can distinguish their effects. In my current state of uncertainty, that seems wiser than the equal and opposite advice, which is to start by testing all of your interventions simultaneously to see if any of them do anything.
Pilar, back off. You know Meritzel's lying, Keltham doesn't.
Fair. Apologies. It seems like the right Kelthamism for the circumstance.
Lesson suspended for the day, for reasons of experimental distinctions, not because he thinks Meritzel couldn't handle more. Meritzel has first claim on his evening if she expects it to be useful to her to be around a Dath Ilani while any further thoughts are playing out. It's the same offer he'd make to Carissa, whom Keltham does not particularly think of as weak under similar circumstances.
That's very sweet of him. She kind of wants to get drunk and have sex without talking about anything at all. Is he up for that?
Sure. He hasn't witnessed this drunk thing and is kinda curious.
Timestamp day 21/17, evening.
Meritzel hopes that her sacrifices for the project are appreciated and appropriately rewarded. She's going to get drunk, but much less drunk than she appears to be getting, and then cry on Keltham and tell him that he's smart and pretty and nice, and it's tragic how he won't hurt her just because she's not into it.
He'll awkwardly hug her, awkwardly have sex with her, and wonder why in the flaming violet blazes anybody would voluntarily take this mind-affecting drug.
I deserve a medal or something.
Yes, good job. You should actually go sober up.
I am not drunk. I mean, yes, sir.
PL timestamp day 22/18.
Acid day.
The Lady Avaricia, since her superiors hate her and are trying to kill her, will reluctantly be impressive on Acid Day. Keltham might have been unimpressed with the alchemy books because of their habit of venturing bizarre claims with no evidence to back them and bizarre theories with no sense of what tests would approve or disprove them, but she's used to that, and has spent a while thinking through which of their claims make more sense in light of Keltham's chemistry, and how they're best translated into chemistry terms. She wouldn't want to dominate the class, though. If anyone else has sketched out likely chemical structures of various alchemical compounds based on what the standard introductory textbooks say about their characteristics. No? Well, probably that's because they were instead working out why there are such differences in the reported boiling temperatures of various alchemical mixtures. In light of what Keltham's taught about chemistry, also no? Maybe some of them want to improve her speculative work on which Galarian substances are which elements.
Keltham seems appropriately impressed with Lady Avaricia's work. If he's upset, or even, in fact, noticing Avaricia being incredibly dismissive and condescending towards everyone else here, including him, it doesn't show, at all. Much progress on acid synthesis is made today. Not to the point where they can complete a full production cycle on using sulfuric acid to make twice as much more sulfuric acid. But they're not going to be able to do that until Keltham can improvise something with linear reaction to temperature that doesn't break down at relatively higher temperatures, calibrated off one of those incredibly scary and dangerous mercury thermometers that was sent to him, and figure out what temperature is, converting units to obvious landmarks, higher than the melting point of water by 450% of the difference between the melting point of water and the boiling point of water. Maybe there's something he can do with the thermal expansion of a metal instead of the expansion of liquid mercury. That requires him to have something to use as a measuring stick, though, and the measuring stick needs to not also be expanding. Well, he could use the difference in expansion between different metals, maybe. You could hope for that to be linear. But you'd need a pretty fine-grained view of the differences. Going from melting water to boiling water will only expand a metal by on the order of 0.1%, if he's got figures roughly right. And using another metal as the reference point would diminish that even further. Does Lady Avaricia have any ideas for that? Also any ideas for identifying element 23? If they had a way to measure the target temperature and element 23, and possibly some way to distill element 8, oxygen, though maybe regular air works for that, Keltham isn't sure, or regular air works if you purify it, though all the spells Keltham has read about so far seem unfortunately aimed towards producing a sphere of air, clear of, say, burning sulfur, and not so much purifying air that you can then use to burn sulfur, but maybe you can pump air out of the purified sphere and it stays pure, or maybe a sufficiently extreme cold spell or ice elemental spell would let them liquefy air and distill out the oxygen. Then they could maybe even complete a full production cycle on sulfuric acid, oil of vitriol. If all goes well, they'll even be able to produce the more expensive, high-purity, high-concentration, distilled oil of vitriol that people usually buy from Hell or the City of Brass. Lady Avariccia is her most preferred form of address. Check. The name on her name tag is complicated.
One doesn't usually leave other names off a first introduction or a name tag, as that'd be denying information to the sort of person who knows how to interpret it. But it's fine to call her something shorter, such as Lady Avariccia. Mercury thermometers can measure up to 3, maybe 4, times the difference between the melting point and the boiling point of water. She's not herself worried about their dangerousness, but he could do all manipulations remotely with unseen servants. If he is. She thinks people have tried almost everything that's cheaper to get than mercury, and it's actually just much better. There's not a lot of likelihood they're going to trying at random invent something better in that temperature range. And if she were going outside it, she'd probably try mercury admixtures. The first thing she'd try to find element, 23, would be to ask an alchemist supplier for false spell silvers that are acid resistant. Is she right that element? 23 is acid resistant? It looks like it ought to be.
If they can figure out element 31, element 49, and element 50, then mixing those in proportions of 68.5% element 31, 21.5% element 49, and 10% element 50 will create a famous weird alloy that melts at slightly under the melting point of water, and which probably goes higher than mercury before it vaporizes, and is relatively not toxic, though you still wouldn't want to, drink a glass of that. That's what civilization uses when it wants metal that's liquid at room temperature. If anybody knows about a light metal with a very low melting point, that's possibly element 31. Probably not doable, but Keltham thought it was worth mentioning. If they knew about element 31, they could use it in thermometers directly, for that matter, unless Keltham is missing some reason why that would work with mercury, but not gallium. The problem with identifying element 23 isn't going to be finding candidates, it's going to be figuring out which candidate is right. Keltham can't really think of any easy element 23 tests. He doesn't have the melting point memorized, or the density, and he's drawing a blank on any other famous chemical reactions that involve vanadium. It should be relatively light, but it's not the lightest metal. He's not even sure offhand if it's acid resistant. The stage of the process where it's used doesn't involve a completed acid. If Keltham can prestidigitate calcium, or some other nearby metal, into behaving like vanadium, by directly manipulating the similarity of its outer electromagnetic shell, and build a spectroscope, they could maybe burn the fake vanadium to see how it looks under a spectroscope, and burn real, relatively light metals under a spectroscope, and figure out which real metal looks like fake vanadium. Possibly. Have they got something that breaks up light into component frequencies, or colors as they'd have it here, along a linear spectrum that runs from red to blue within its visible part?
You can do that with most crystals.
I have diamond earrings in my room which you may borrow, assuming I'll either get them back intact or be given compensation to replace them.
All right. The tech behind a spectroscope seems relatively simple. Next on the plan is building a spectroscope, seeing how it plays with prestidigitated and natural materials as they get burned within a flame of standardized temperature. They should see about getting a boundfire elemental for that possibly. It seems like the sort of heat output that might be possibly more standardized than burning wood or candles. And then seeing if Keltham can prestidigitate calcium ash, or a different metal, into burning the color spectrum that element 23 should burn, given its orbitals, and that'll give them a reference point for looking through fake spell silvers. Is there any sort of magic for magnifying things enormously, like Keltham might use to zoom in on a less than 0.1% divergence in the thermal expansion of two different metals?
There's not magic for that which anyone here knows of.
Consider that general research field marked as important. Among the general facts that civilization knows is that there is a lot you can do with sufficiently finely applied forces. If there were some way to make people 10 times larger, wizards 10 times smaller, and then look inside of people's bodies, for example, you could probably use just a mage hand to apply permanent reversible male contraception, e.g. via tying a little bow tie knot in the channel that conducts sperm to semen. In case nobody's mentioned it to the new candidates, very cheap contraception that can be afforded and used even by very stupid people is one of the standing requests from Chelish governance. Without that, increasing agricultural yields relative to reference farmland, or improving anti-plague measures relative to a reference urban density, might only get you larger or denser populations until they get hungry again or sick again.
That's actually clever. She approves.
All right, this was a long day, but it feels, at least to him, like they are on an exciting journey of discovery that hopefully soon reaches something saleable. Thanks, Lady Avaricia. If she was trying to impress him, she succeeded.
If I were trying to impress you, I'd be glad to hear that, I guess.
Keltham will avoid suggesting in the future that she might be trying to impress him. Good night, everybody. Dayu.
Sevar, Asmodia, Pilar, can we have a moment?
Sure can.
We're doomed. She's a trope.
Is she? I think she's just an obnoxious person who inconveniently had a more well-rounded education than the rest of us.
She's a Doth Ilani Aerolarp trope, and Keltham has already recognized her and is dealing with her however Doth Ilani tropes say he's supposed to. She's next going to turn out to have a sexual fetish that conveniently matches up with him and will be touched by a god.
Well, I guess at least you're making predictions. He did seem to be not confused.
That's really not good. We have to figure out some way to undo the evidence that presents for tropes, make Keltham think she's not really whatever trope she is. Except even that itself would be too suspicious, after I told Keltham I wasn't really an asexual. If, it turns out on another look, Avaricia is not really whatever she is. That's way too much of a trend. This really isn't good.
I don't want her in the harem either.
Dies in an acid explosion? Too easy to just resurrect her. Quits in a huff? There's still that.
Her quitting would look pretty uncharacteristic for tropes, or a competent conspiracy, but not for conspiracy trying to hide tropes, what with that being exactly who we are. Ione, are you sure?
Can you think of some other reason why the incredibly lawful good society of Dathilan, with nothing like nobility, would have a recognizable concept for extremely arrogant, condescending, rude, dismissive people like that?
Pull timestamp, day 23, 19, morning.
Okay, this time, Keltham remembers to request Glimpse of Beyond during prayer, and to send out early messages to Carissa, Maritzel, and Yaisa, requesting them to prepare Alter Self during their morning spell prep, and see him immediately thereafter. Yaisa didn't particularly remind Keltham after he forgot to keep their appointment last time, but maybe the switch around is for the better security-wise.
They do so, and show up at approximately all the same time. Doesn't Keltham have several additional girlfriends? Yaisa wonders aloud.
Am I missing anybody in particular, obviously, on this list? That would be a pretty worrisome fact, if so.
Asmodia? Ione?
Do you have reason to believe I've fucked either of those people?
Just that you vanish to your cuddle room with them in the evenings frequently.
I've been on a date with Ione that didn't go to the cuddle room, and I think I've gone to bed with Asmodia twice. Like actual bedroom bed, not cuddle room bed. Do you have reason to believe this isn't the case? And if so, do you remember which night it was?
Just what Paxty said. She might have said bedroom, because they're the same thing.
I doubt they'd mind doing an alter self too, even though you definitely haven't been mind-controlled to forget you fucked them.
Neither of them have signed that contract, for obvious reasons. I guess I could ask anyways, but Carissa, on your own view of reality, how confused am I supposed to be right now?
I am not surprised that the rumor mill among the bored girls who got removed from the project mixed up dates and cuddle room sessions, so it's not very confusing to me. Rumor mills are just like that. They're not following you and Ione around on a date to find out where it ends. I feel like if there were a conspiracy here, probably they would have told Yaisa not to say the conspiracy out loud to you for no reason. But that said, I suspect that both Asmodia and Ione would be willing for a fairly trivial amount of money to do an alter self if it gives you peace of mind.
Okay, let's just get this self-altering done, and then I'll track down Paxty and see what she thinks happened. Just to make sure that nobody is accidentally sliding between nearly neighboring parallel universes, because that is very an Arrow-LARP trope.
Why is her life like this? Or rather, why is Dathilani fiction, which her life needs to be not mistakable for, like this?
They all cast alter self and turn into boys. To glimpse of beyond, glimpse of truth, they still look like their normal selves. They all turn back as the spell wears off. You can stop it early, but then you risk Keltham worrying about whether the duration matters.
Actually, Keltham will cast Glimpse of Beyond, unwarned, but Carissa has probably guessed it's coming, since she's the one who suggested that, and verify he can see the correct original people beneath them. And then Keltham will immediately turn around and look the other way, once he's done that, and ask how long the spell needs to stay up. If it's not long, they can change back now.
Ah, okay, cool. They'll all do that. Most girls find it kind of uncomfortable to be boys, and vice versa.
Yeah, his sexuality was apparently less than totally okay with seeing that. Somebody needs to hurry up on that male bisexuality enhancement. This is ridiculous. Keltham goes looking for Paxty.
Paxty did notice Ione and Keltham slipping off on a date at dinner time. She heard about the Asmodia-Keltham date from Pella.
Okay, but did she see Ione and Keltham going from dinner to a cuddle room?
No.
Keltham will go ask Pella what she thinks happened between Keltham and Asmodia. What does Pella think she knows, and how does Pella think she knows it?
Pella has a familiar, a bird, and it was out flying and saw them. It wasn't spying, that'd be creepy. It was just getting some air, and she has a little page of pictures for it to point at, because it's good practice to communicate with your familiar. And it pointed at Keltham and Asmodia and bed. Did she do something wrong?
Not particularly. Keltham is trying to figure out if people are going sideways through alternate universes, or if that's not what's going on, get a grasp on how rumors operate inside Golarion. Did Pela herself tell other people that Keltham and Asmodia were having sex, or that he'd gone to his cuddle room with Asmodia, or just describe to them what her familiar had said?
Well, over lunch, Jackme said that Keltham must be sleeping with half the students by now, and Yaisa said it wasn't half, and Paxti said it was Ione, Carissa, Meritzel, Yaisa at a minimum, and then Pela said Asmodia too. Her familiar was out flying and saw them together in bed, and everyone said, huh. And then they started speculating about who Keltham would sleep with next. They know he's not sleeping with Pilar, because she'd look way cheerfuler.
Okay, that sounds sort of like maybe rumors happen when people don't rigorously distinguish their observations from their inferences. Keltham guesses that sounds plausible. He'll keep an eye out for signs that there's some kind of massive trope-related sideways reality slippage going on, and the conspiracy is trying to hide it from him, he guesses. Though under the circumstances, this seems less like classical conspiracy, and more like something where people like Yaisa don't know, and will blurt things out in front of him. Keltham wishes he had some sort of reference magical world with average intelligence 10, known to have no conspiracy or tropes, so he could know whether rumors were a totally reasonable phenomenon to be occurring there.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059.